Welcome everyone to my YouTube channel, Video Chess Training, here on YouTube. I'm International Master William Pascal, and I've started a series here I've entitled English Opening Brilliancies. This is a game from one of my favorite players of all time, former world champion Mikhail Botvinnik. Botvinnik is playing white against Russian master Levenfish. The game is from 1940 in the Soviet Championship. So, Botvinnik, I think one of the world's greatest players of the English opening. He played pretty much wide variety of systems with white, but particular attention to his play with c4. I think certainly one of the greatest players, and he definitely influenced, for example, Garry Kasparov, who did resort to the English opening on regular occasions. So c4 is effectively a Sicilian defense in reverse. Black plays e5. It's quite a good opening, perhaps a little bit less combative than d4 and e4, but not necessarily, especially if we get a reverse Sicilian, as is the case here. So Botvinnik-Levenfish, c4, e5. This is Black's most aggressive move. Black is playing as if he's white with a move less here. After e5, now knight to c3. Knight develops behind the advanced pawn. Botvinnik is one of the greatest masters of strategy in the history of the game. I think special attention should be paid to his strategic understanding in this series. Knight to c3, now knight to f6. Also a little more combative than, let's say, knight to c6. Knight to c6 would be essentially a closed Sicilian in reverse. Black is not trying to fight back for control of the d5 square. So knight f6, essentially the most aggressive move for Black. And now white plays knight to f3. The alternatives here for white are significant, but this is the most aggressive move. After knight f3, we put pressure on the e5 pawn. We don't give Black really a chance to do his own thing. Black must push the pawn, defend it, or do something else, and this gives Black less choices. Then, say for example, the quieter move g3. g3 would allow Black to play a very wide variety of moves. We're not putting any direct pressure on the Black position. Nevertheless, g3 is a good system. We'll see that in other videos in the series. Now knight f3, Black plays knight to c6. Clearly the best move here. d6 would be passive, leading to a kind of old Indian. Pushing the pawn forward, generally considered incorrect. After knight to g5, the pawn is overextended, and the only way to try to justify this system for Black would be to play the rather crazy delayed wing gambit with b5, which is considered dubious primarily because of d3. You might want to check out a very good book I would recommend, Dynamic Chess Strategy by Grandmaster Mihai Suba. He goes into some detail on this. Suba is a big expert on the English opening. That's a very good book. But in any case, this is not really a reliable system for Black. Black has to play knight to c6, and now white has a wide variety of choices in the so-called four knights English. Now, perhaps g3 is the most common move for white. Black has choices to keep a closed game or to open it up with essentially what is a dragon with reverse colors. d5, that's the sharpest move after g3. White has other options, e3, Capablanca's d3. Pretty much very wide variety of choices here. a3, d4, e4, Alyakin's move, e4 is interesting. I've tried probably all these variations, but Botvinnik instead plays d4. Again, the main moves are probably g3 and e3, which are both moves that contribute to white's development. d4 is similar to, let's say, the Scotch game in the e4, e5 openings. When we play d4, we're attacking Black's strong central pawn, trying to knock it out and open the game. That's the upside. The downside is that d4 doesn't necessarily develop any pieces, except for expanding the potential with the bishop on c1, a little bit the queen on d1. Again, like the Scotch, it's not really developing and opening the game. So you have to be careful here, I think, with white that you don't fall behind development after d4. Now black has two choices. Mainly e takes d4, but I think that e4 deserves to be considered as well. Again, there's an argument whether this pawn is overextended after knight g5, bishop b4. But white can choose as well, I think here, knight to e5, knight to d2. So we have a wide variety of choices. Alright, the main game now, again, Botvinnik-Levenfish, take. Interesting move there for white, I should note. Knight d5. You want to try something different. Knight takes d4. And now bishop b4. Developing quickly, playing in Nimzo style. There's really no other reliable move for black here. I've occasionally seen other moves like g6. This is possible. g6 would lead to a form of King's Indian after e4, where black has sort of prematurely traded off their central pawn. White could also play safely with a move like g3. Certainly nothing wrong with that. So bishop b4 is almost universally played. And now the question is, what does white do? Getting the bishop outside the pawn chain is very, very normal. But a secondary plan for white here is g3. Anytime you play g3, you have to watch the c4 pawn. Black can try to go after that pawn with knight to e5. Perhaps materialistic and greedy, but this plan could be dangerous. There's some games with knight e5, queen b3. And this is quite an unexplored position, actually. But g3 is a serious alternative. This was traditionally the main move now. Bishop g5, as played by Botvinnik. Black now h6. The pin is obviously an issue. If black doesn't want to play g5, after h6, bishop h4, we have to find another way to break the pin. And we can do so slowly with something like d6 and queen e7. Black trades immediately before white has time to play rook to c1. Again, if you give him time, I think that white here will take that opportunity to avoid the doubled pawns with rook c1. So bishop takes c3 is considered a good move. B takes c, and now knight e5. And this is a strange looking move, in a sense, because black is not developing. Botvinnik here plays e3 very safely. But there's another move that's considered to be good, and I think this is the main move now in the 21st century. If this variation is played today, f4. There was a game between Kramnik and Karpov in 1996. f4, knight g6, and now bishop takes f6. The problem is that white has many, many pawns on the dark squares, and these pawns are going to inhibit that bishop. So we really would prefer to trade it off. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen takes g3, and white's control of the center, powerful knight on d4, powerful bishop coming to the long diagonal, and just general good control of the center, I think, guarantee white at least an equal game. We see here a typical position that Botvinnik was very fond of, doubled pawns. He loved to play with doubled pawns that control the center. Knight e5 is the game, and then Botvinnik just plays e3. This is from 1940, so theory wasn't well established yet. But e3 is a safer move. I've played this myself. Safer than f4. Now black plays knight to g6 unprovoked. While there's nothing wrong with this move, I'm not sure that black has to do that immediately. It may be more accurate to just wait and play something like d6. So knight g6 immediately, and now I think that white should probably take, similar to the other variation we looked at, bishop f6, queen f6, giving that one bishop up. You could even play f4, transposing to the other line we were looking at. Possibly, after f4, white has the plan to put the king on f2, guard the e3 pawn, and conserve time. So, in the game we have knight g6, bishop g3, and now knight e4. Ultimately, and I've played this position myself, ultimately we end up giving the bishop anyway, so we don't really conserve the bishop pair here. The best move for white, perhaps something like queen f3. I don't know if this has been tried before. difficult to say. A slightly unnatural move. I would recommend here queen c2 if I had to choose. Probably queen c2, knight takes g3, h takes g3, with approximately equal game. But Botvinnik here, queen c2. In fact, I played a game myself with bishop d3 in the US Championship at one point. Bishop d3, knight g3, h g3, and then knight e5, f4. This is one of my own games. f4, knight d3 check, queen d3. Pascal Botvinnik-Levenfish from the US Championship in 2003. I don't think that I really have an advantage here. The strong knight on d4, but black has no weaknesses, and the bishop in the endgame. I think it's approximately equal. I shouldn't really expect to win such a position. Botvinnik instead playing queen c2, safer move. Knight takes, pawn takes, and now d6. And we see a typical position where white's pieces are very active, but he has conceded the double isolated pawns at c3 and c4. Kind of a favorite structure of Mikhail Botvinnik. He did not mind double pawns that aid control of the center. And another factor of this position is the white king. We have a half open h-file. Castling queenside, obviously not a good idea because of all the openness on the queen side. So Botvinnik's interesting plan here, f4. Again, with the idea of putting the king on f2 so that the rook can remain active along the h-file. It's like an aggressive strategic type of play. Black plays queen e7, white plays king f2. And now, one idea that's interesting is c5. I mean, if black can blockade that, I don't think this is necessarily correct here, though, because the black pawn can become backward. After knight f5, I think white is just slightly better. Perhaps later, c5. Black should probably just castle in this position. And there is one game with white playing bishop e2, another game with white playing knight f5. Knight f5, bishop f5, queen f5. The position looks relatively close. But now an interesting thing happens. After king f2, Levenfish plays knight f8, and this is a clear loss of time. The black king is in the center. Black plays as if he has all the time in the world, but I don't really know what he's doing here with knight f8, heading for e6. But this always can walk into knight f5, keep in mind. If you try to maneuver the knight to d7 or the knight to e6, white is going to have knight f5 with tempo. A very misguided move. Black must not waste time. Any kind of developing move here, bishop d7 or castles, and I think that black has a reasonable position. So, knight f8 is too slow. What do we do? What do we do to try to exploit this position? And now, Botvinnik, brilliancy c5. This is both strategic and tactical. He's combining tactical ideas against c6 with bishop e5 check with a strategic idea of getting rid of his doubled pawns and also perhaps opening up the black king in the center. c5 is a typical sacrifice, by the way, that we would see in the Nimzo Indian. Many times double pawn positions in the Nimzo, white is sacrificing c5. Oftentimes with the pawn on b6 for black, try to open up the fianchetto. But here we have c5, also before black has time to play c5, keep in mind. D takes c5, bishop e5 check. And what is the point? We have ideas of knight f5. The main point of this move is in the event of bishop d7, we now have knight f5 with very strong threats. This is protected. Now we're attacking g7. So for example, black can't play queen e6 because of knight takes g7 check. Where is he going to go? If he goes to f6, we have queen e4 check. And if he goes knight e6 now, eventually his king is going to get roughed up in the center here. Bishop d7, king d7. And while I can't say that white is winning definitively, it looks very dangerous for the black king with all the white pieces quite active in the center. So I think that white has a sheer initiative in this position. So instead of bishop d7, black opts for knight d7, but you can see both rooks out of the game, king still in the center, bishop still basically undeveloped. We have knight f5, queen f6, and now rook to d1. And we have very good control of d6. If black tries to play c6, we're going to be able to use the d6 square to invade. In the meantime, black can't castle without dropping a piece based on the pressure on d7. So instead he plays g6 now, forcing the knight to make away from the threats here. White plays knight takes h6. Discovery is of course possible with knight to g4, heading into the e5 square now. I think that black is strategically losing. Black plays rook f8, very passive, and now g4. What's notable is that all of the white pieces, both rooks, the knight, the queen, and the bishop, active, participating in the attack, unified and coordinated. After g4, a6, g5, queen e6, we have simply bishop e2, threatening to regroup back here through g4. If nothing else, we bring the knight back through g4, attacking the f6 and the e5 squares. Material is equal at this point, but black's lack of development is a very serious handicap, probably decisive. Now knight to b6, not a terrific square ever for the knight. Knight to g4, and you see these huge weaknesses in the position. Also the h file is open now. So a total strategic crush. Knight g4, king e7, knight f6. And there's no way for black to survive with a knight on f6 unless you could exchange it off. If you try to play knight d7 in this position, I would say probably realistically the only chance, but we have now knight to d5 check. Very serious threats against c7. Black would have to play king d8, and I seriously doubt that black has good chances to survive here with the king along the d file. Almost certainly decisive. So after knight f6, black plays queen to c6. Really no valid ideas other than opening up the bishop here, trying to survive with knight on f6, rook h7, increasing the pressure, bishop f5. This is simply a blunder, but it's very difficult to suggest a move for black, realistically. Perhaps trying bishop e6. The problem is white is threatening queen takes g6. At the very minimum, we're going to take that valuable pawn, get a little closer to the black king. So he tries to stop queen takes g6, bishop f5, e4, bishop e6, and now f5. The position just sort of plays itself. Everything is protected. The white king was just untouched, and black resigns here, facing terrible opening of the position with his king trapped in the center. If you ever take on f5, now the e file will open up against the black king. If you don't take, you have to move the bishop somewhere. Very dangerous situation. White is threatening to take on g6 decisively, so black simply resigned. I think this was an excellent game. Black really went wrong with knight f8 if we go back to that position. Key moment, he retreated his knight. This is really strategically impossible to understand. At move 14, black slightly behind in development. White has the worst pawn structure with the doubled pawns, but very good control of the center. If you think about the position in terms of control of the center, white seems to be clearly better. But black retreating his knight to f8 here, strategically giving white golden opportunity to open the game with c5, and white takes control of the battle. This was, again, Botvinnik versus Levenfish. I think a very interesting variation of the English, worth a try. The move 4 alternatives, I think knight c6, d4, perhaps not a threatening move, but a good move to have in your repertoire if you're playing the English, to take your opponents a little bit off the beaten track. Thanks for joining me here at Video Chess Training on YouTube. My name is International Master William Pascal. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.